Welcome, listeners. This is Sebastian Nothwell, here today interviewing queer romance author Sarah Wallace. Hello, Sarah.
I'm excited to be here.
So excited to have you. Now, which of your books are you most excited to talk about today?
Today I just sent the cover reveal of my next book to my newsletter subscribers, so I thought it would be fun to talk about The Spellmaster of Tutting on Cress.
Heck yes, Spellmaster of Tutting on Cress. Please, please, please. Tell us all about it. This is part of the Metal and Men series, yes?
Yes, this is book 5 in the Metal and Men series. It's Jerry's book. Jerry is the sister of Gavin Hartford, the main character of Letters to Half Moon Street, which is book 1 in Metal and Mend. So readers who have been along with the journey since Letters to Half Moon Street have been asking for a Jerry book, so here it is. So it is about Jerry falling in love, but with a lot of meddling from her friends and family first.
And dare I say some mending as well?
Yes, definitely some mending as well, always.
So this all takes place in the same kind of queer normative Regency fantasy world?
Yes, this all takes place in the same world. It all takes place in Tutting on Cress, the made-up village in Bedfordshire. So it's kind of a small-town romance as well. But yes, it all takes place in a queer normative Regency England, where magic is real, and like I said, it's queer normative, so same-sex marriage is legal, and trans and non-binary people are treated with respect and equality. That's the basic setting of the Metal and Men series.
What kind of drew you to that setting? I've always been curious, frankly.
Well, so I started writing these books when I was in grad school, and I had an assignment to write a short story, and I hadn't written anything new in years, and I was kind of panicking that I didn't have any more stories to tell. And at the time, I was reading a lot of queer romance, mostly contemporary queer romance, and also a lot of Georgette Heyer, which is quite a blend of things to be reading at the same time. And if you've read Georgette Heyer, you probably know that there are a lot of her books that come close to feeling queer, but just miss the mark. Obviously, there's lots of problematic stuff with Georgette Heyer, but as I was reading those books, I really wanted to read something that was queer and also set in Regency period. I didn't know about Cat Sebastian or K.J. Charles yet, but I decided to write the story that I wanted to read, and I like low-stakes stories, and I pretty much always include magic in my books in some form or other, so I wound up writing a queer Regency romance with low stakes and magic. And that's how my whole series started.
It is, dare I say, inspiring to hear that you started a multi-book series with the fear that you had no more stories left to tell, because, like, way to prove yourself out wrong.
You know, I wrote The Glamorous Spell of Rose Talbot, which is the novelette in my newsletter, and I wrote that, and as soon as I finished it, you know the feeling that you get when you write something and you think, this is the best thing I have ever written. That's what I felt after writing that story, and I was like, I want to write a whole bunch more of these. So then I started Letters to Half Moon Street.
Positive reinforcement.
That's right. Then the series it was just the one book, Letters to Half Moon Street, and then I randomly wrote One Good Turn, and then I was halfway writing One Good Turn, and I decided I needed to write The Education of Pip, and by that point I had already decided this was going to be a series, so book 4 is Seb's book, and I knew I wanted Seb to have a book, so I wrote his book after that. Jerry's was one of the hardest books to write. It took me a few years to get to Jerry's book, but now I'm planning an 8-book series total. I don't know when I'm going to finish writing, but that's the plan.
I am always very impressed by, like, being able to make a plan and stick to it, and also, like, keep playing around in a consistent world.
I will admit I did get kind of burnt out writing Metal and Mend.
And took a break to write how many other books?
Yeah. Last year when Shannon S. O'Callahan reached out to me in January of 2023, I was in the middle of my burnout from Metal and Mend, and then we proceeded to write 4 books in 7 months. So that turns out to be the antidote to burnout, is to write something completely different. Me, at least.
Just do something else. Start a different multi-book series, and oh my god.
And neither of us expected that to happen. That was not a plan. Shannon's not even a series writer, really, so when we first started writing together, she was like, it doesn't have to be a series. It could just be the one book. And I'm like, but it could be a series, though.
But have you considered?
But maybe. And we wrote the first book, and then she was the one who texted me and was like, so I have an idea for book 2. So that's how that happened.
That is also a very cool, just like, co-writing journey.
Yes, it is. That's always really fun.
What drives your storytelling? Because something's got to be driving if we have multiple multi-book series
Yes.
going on, frankly.
Yeah, for sure. I write character-driven stories primarily, and I noticed that tends to be where I start with my books, is usually with a character in particular. I sometimes have a loose premise. Glamour Spell of Rose Tablet, Letters to Half Moon Street, and Free Spells and Bridegrooms. All of those books started with a basic premise that I kind of expanded on, but most of my other books have actually been from, like, Seb's book was because I wanted to write a book about Seb, so I kind of worked backwards with what sort of story would that be? What sort of ending does Seb need? Same with Jerry. I'd known I wanted to write a Jerry book since I'd finished Letters to Half Moon Street, and it took me a long time to write it because I couldn't figure out why Jerry needed somebody. She seems to do pretty well without someone, but it was wanted to be a romance. So I was like, who would even be good enough for her? I don't know. So it took me a while to figure out what kind of a guy she would end up with. And because this one was one of the hardest ones, I wound up rewriting large chunks of it multiple times before I got it to where I wanted it. But the characters tend to drive the storytelling. All of the books that I have planned for Meddle and Mend are all from characters' stories that I want to tell. And so I usually, like, I know I want to write a book for the Juke X of Mulberry, and it took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do for that one. That one's not written yet, but it starts from the character, typically, for me.
I feel like that's a very good strategy for writing in general, because frankly I love character-driven stories, but also for romance particularly. Like, if the characters aren't there and their emotions don't matter, the romance tends to kind of fall flat.
Agreed. One of the things to touch on briefly, at least with the co-writing journey with Shannon and I, one of the many reasons we've worked so well together is that we both write character-driven stories. If you're ever going to write with somebody else, make sure you are coming at it from the same place, because it'd be hard if one of us was writing from character-driven and one of us was writing a plot-driven story, because motivation wouldn't be the same. And so even when it comes to writing like a sex scene, for me at least, I like to know, like, why is that important for the character and how would that character react, and why is that sex scene or the romantic moment, why is that happening at this moment in time for this character, and how is that going to propel the story forward. And I got a grad degree in creative writing, and probably one of the most important things I learned from it was that plot is when a character needs something and there's a barrier between the character and what they need. And it's not necessarily what they want, they need. So sometimes the character thinks that they want something, but they actually need something else, and that's where the barrier comes in, and that's what drives the plot. And ever since I heard that, that really helped me get unstuck with books whenever I would hit a point where I didn't know what to do. I was like, well, what is holding this character back from what they need? And like, so I sometimes work backwards from the end of the book to get to where I'm stuck, and that helps me get unstuck.
Yeah, that is a fantastic way to approach inner conflict in particular.
Thank you. It really helped me a lot.
Speaking of like character specificity in sex scenes, I feel like stories in general are always weirdly more resonant the more specific they are.
Yes. It feels like counterintuitive that the more specific you are, the more universal the story is.
Yeah.
Or the character is, which feels like the opposite would be true. But Jerry's book, for example, she's demi-romantic, and I pulled a lot of my own personal feelings about being demi-romantic in it. And I've never had the exact situation that Jerry finds herself in, where she likes somebody, but she doesn't have that romantic attraction, but she feels like she should because this guy is perfect for her, and why doesn't she feel that feeling that she's been waiting all her life to feel? And I've had multiple beta readers text me while they're reading the book to say, like, oh my God, this is exactly how I feel when I have relationships, which is very cool because it's a very specific problem to have.
It's also like just so validating in both directions. Like validation as a writer for being able to evoke something that speaks to so many people, and also like validation for those readers to see themselves on the page.
Yes, that's one of my favorite things I think about writing queer stories, especially writing stories about queer identities that aren't explored as much. I think demisexual experience has been getting more attention, but demi-romantic is kind of less common in books, so it's nice to be able to write that. And even with the demisexual rep, Gavin is demisexual, and in Free Spells and Bridegrooms, Roger is demisexual, and I've had multiple readers either write in reviews or reach out to me to say that they felt really seen when they read Gavin or Roger's experience, which is really nice.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Do you have a favorite character you've created? And if so, who are they?
I spent some time thinking about this. As I'm sure you know, it's hard to pick a favorite character because it's like picking your favorite child. But Bertie Finlington is one of my favorite characters I've written. part of the reason for that is he's a character archetype that I had been kind of obsessed with for a long time and I'd been wanting to write. And I finally, when I was writing One Good Turn, I'm like, why not just write the character that I want? And the archetype is basically, I don't know if there is a formal name for this, but in my head I call it like the clever fop or the wise fop, but it's the Percy Blakeney, Zorro, if you're familiar with Gil Kierkegaard, Lloyd Akildama type of character where they are usually very fashionable and foppish, often very effeminate, and everyone takes them for granted or underestimates them and assumes them to be foolish, but they are secretly like probably the most intelligent person in the room.
It's a very specific brand of like obfuscating stupidity.
Yes, it is. It's a very specific type, and I am obsessed with it every time I come across it in movies or books because it's so specific. And I feel like it usually works in historical stories because the fop is a very specific historical archetype, I think. Scott Pimpernel, Percy Blakeney, kind of a situation where their foppish exterior is a shield to keep them private, keep secrets, usually if you're talking about Scott Pimpernel or Zorro. But I don't know, I've always been obsessed with the idea of somebody who's secretly way more intelligent than they seem, and especially with characters who are kind of almost aggressively cheerful to mask something underneath. So Birdie is that, where people often assume he's just an eccentric kind of wacky guy, but he's secretly extremely intelligent and like changing the world.
And frankly, that's very cool and sexy of him.
Thank you. I thought so too. It's one of my favorite archetypes because I always find like Scott Pimpernel, like Percy Blakeney is one of my longest running literary crushes. So that's definitely me writing my fantasy.
Speaking of the Scarlet Pimpernel, what stories inspire you?
Oh, great segue. Scott Pimpernel is definitely one of them. I kind of feel reluctant to say Georgia Hare, but she was one of the reasons I started writing these books, so I probably should include her. And I think there's probably something to be said about reading problematic authors and then figuring out what you can do to improve upon them.
You know, just like writing something that will make them spin in their graves so hard that they can power a new kind of transformer.
Exactly. That's the goal. So Georgia Hare is probably up there. I feel like as a Regency writer, I feel like I have to say Jane Austen. Not like there's anything wrong with saying Jane Austen, but Jerry's book, The Spellmaster of Tutting on Cress, is very loosely inspired by Sense and Sensibility. Small tangent, because I was trying to figure out why is this supposed to be a small village, and it's like, why do wealthy, eligible men keep moving to this small village? Doesn't actually make any sense.
Is it the Providence, Massachusetts of Bedford County?
So I was running out of reasons for people to move there. And I thought, well, in Sense Sensibility, people move into the neighborhood because they inherited a house that other people actually already lived in. So what if there isn't some vacant large property, but actually an inhabited large property, and the bachelor moves in? So that book was inspired by the idea of what if John Dashwood in Sense Sensibility was not actually the worst and was a decent human being. So that's the love interest of that book.
What if he didn't suck? Hear me out.
What if he didn't suck? What if he actually was sexy and single and nice? So Jane Austen's up there. In terms of authors who have inspired my voice, I think Diana Wynne Jones, because I've read House Moving Castle so many times, it's fallen apart.
It's so cozy.
So good. I love that book so much. Patricia C. Reedy is another sometimes problematic author, but very influential to me. I've read Sorcery in Cecilia or The Enchanted Chocolate Pot by Patricia C. Reedy and Caroline Stevenmer many times. And every time I read through that trilogy, I finish it and I want to read it again, or I want to write. Like, those are the two moods I end up with after reading those books, which is, what you want in a book.
Yeah.
So I think also Lloyd Alexander, his female characters were very influential to me growing up. I think he wrote a lot of really spunky and phenomenal heroines and a lot of really good reluctant heroes. And he was kind of the first author I read that had an unreliable narrator, which I really love. Those are probably some of the influential authors. I have a long list.
What is the number one thing you want readers to take away from your books?
I want the book to be comforting. So I want them to come away with a feeling of comfort and coziness and joy. One of my professors in grad school warned me that my books were going to be escapist. I'm like,
yeah, and?
That's the point.
Was there more, sir, or?
Great, then I'm on the right track, right? I was like, so I did it.
Congrats.
That's the vibe I want from my books. Is I want people to feel cozy and feel like they got something soft for a little bit.
That is a wonderful feeling to be able to inspire in people.
Thank you. I try. The second and third book in the Metal and Men series has been a bit of a mixed bag in terms of reactions because a lot of people say that it's cozy, and then a few people will be like, this is a very disturbing themes. I don't know if this could be called cozy. I think this was a very disturbing story. I'm like, okay, sorry.
I fear we are in a similar boat there.
We are. Yes. What is cozy?
One of these days, we're gonna pin it down.
Someday.
We've started this podcast. This is actually investigative journalism. We're going to find out. Serial Season 4. What is cozy?
Oh, God.
What are some themes that you love to explore or revisit in your writing?
Queer joy in general is something I try to explore, and queer love in various forms, whether that's romantic love or platonic love or found family. And I think the idea of being kind to others usually has to start with being kind to yourself.
Yes.
Is kind of a primary thesis for a lot of my books, even if it's not intentional, but that usually winds up being a primary theme for a lot of my characters is that they have to learn how to be kind to themselves in order to be kind to others, in order to kind of fit with the rest of their found family.
Peeking behind the curtain, this is the second author interview we've done in the history of this entire podcast. And already we are 2 for 2 with people saying, yeah, found family. And I'm starting to wonder how strong the correlation is between queer stories and found family specifically, and if this does, in fact, relate to how a lot of queer folks do have to make their own families.
Yeah, I think that Venn diagram might be a circle,
Uh-oh.
personally.
Serial Season 5. Gonna get to the bottom of this.
I know that I always love found family stories, and I don't know if it's because I'm queer, or I know that when I came out as bi to one of my best friends, she had come out to me previously as ace. And even though I knew she was queer, she was one of the people I was most worried about coming out to because I was very anxious that she would say, oh, you're just saying that because you want to fit in, or you're just saying that because I'm queer, so you want to be queer too. I had all sorts of like really mean things in my head that she would say in response. She didn't say any of that. I said, bye. She's like, oh, great. I have a book I can recommend to you.
Oh.
So it was one of the best coming out moments, actually. But after I came out and I explained, like, oh my God, I'm so relieved. I've been stressing out that you would say this or that. And she responded that like gravitates towards like.
Yep.
And she said, you're not queer because I'm queer. We're friends because we're both queer. And I think that's kind of a lot of the root of found family is that like attracts like, and we wind up finding people like us because that's what we need. And I would say for my experience, that's probably why, since I have very few straight friends. So that feels like a common theme.
I mean, yeah, same here. Well, it's also like, I sometimes find certain readers who either are not part of the queer community or have not yet realized it or found the queer community. There tends to be an assumption that it's strange or unusual for an entire friend group to be queer. And it's just like,
Yeah, there's usually like a token straight.
that might be the most realistic thing hanging on the book right now. Like, that, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like if you have a queer friend group, queer people are going to be either the entirety or the majority of the population of that group.
Even, or sometimes especially, in a society that frowns on that sort of thing. It's almost as though you need community even more then.
Oh my God. Wild.
Sorry, I will step off my soapbox and get back to the interview, I promise.
Listen, I can join you on the soapbox. That's fine.
There's room for everyone. We've boxed so much soap. But I am also curious, what drew you to your subgenre?
I'd say both romance and cozy fantasy, and possibly especially queer romance and cozy fantasy, both tend to end happily. One of my soapboxes, and slight tangent, is I have found it fascinating since cozy fantasy has risen in popularity that there's a huge intersection between romance readers and cozy fantasy readers. And I think it's because what you can expect from both of them is pretty much the same, that you can expect a happy ending. You can expect, even if it's a little bit more high stakes or high angst for the romance part, it's going to end in a feel-good way, some way or another. And for both of those, they kind of go hand in hand, at least in my mind they do. So as I kind of started off writing comfort reads. Cozy fantasy I didn't even know that was a term at the time that I was writing these books. And cozy fantasy just kind of accidentally happened because that's what I would have written anyway. And I was reading a lot of romance. So my books aren't all romances, but they all end happily, regardless of whether there's a romantic plot or not.
And I also like that it gives room for stories revealing the truth that not everyone's happily ever after is romantic in nature.
Yeah, agreed. Book 2, One Good Turn has an aromantic main character, and so it has a platonic relationship with somebody at the end of the book, but it's not a romance. And the platonic relationship isn't the main part of the book either. It's kind of a B plot. So I don't think romance is necessary for happily ever after, which is one of the reasons I like writing cozy fantasy / romance, because then you sometimes get to explore things like aromantic main characters and stuff without having to stick to a romance plot, which is nice.
Yeah.
A little more freeing.
And what advice do you have for aspiring authors, and perhaps more specifically with your co-writing experience, which is rather unique, I would say?
It is. In general, I would say write the story you want to read. That's my general advice to writers. In terms of co-writing, I would say find somebody who wants to write the sort of stories you do. Communication is key. I think one of the reasons that Shannon and I have been so successful as co-writers is because we communicate everything. And kind of like I touched on before, it helps if you're both the same types of writers, in that we're both character-driven writers and we're both plantsers. We started off writing Brief Spells and Bridegrooms, planning it out very carefully because we were both anxious to make it work. None of us are really planners, but we planned that book and then we went fully off the rails as soon as we started writing. Did not stick to the main plot, but we did wind up finding a cadence that worked for us where we would meet like every week and plan out the next beat of the story together and like very much plan it out like scene by scene what was going to happen and what the point of that scene was. And then we'd move on, we'd write the chapters, and then we'd meet again and talk through the next beat. And that got us through 4 books. Was that kind of accidental discovery that that's what worked for us. But I don't think it would have worked if Shannon was a hardcore planner, because there are times where I'm writing, I'm like, oh, sorry, I combined these 2 chapters that we talked about. Sorry about that. And she was like, great. So I think it wouldn't have worked either if one of us was a full pantser and then the other one was like, but what's the story leading towards? What's the end of the book? And the other one was like, I don't know, we're just vibing. So I think having, in fact, we both have similar writing styles in both our approach to writing. When Shannon reached out to me, I had read Bella Enchanted, and I knew that she wrote queer, cozy fantasy romance set in late 19th century Ireland, and I was writing queer, cozy fantasy romance set in early 19th century England. So I was like, well, this couldn't be more perfect if we tried. So it started off seeming perfect because we wrote similar genres, very adjacent types of worlds, and then it wound up working out perfectly because we have very solid communication and we become really good friends and we approach writing in similar ways. And we both want to write comfort stories, so we both wind up pushing to write soft, comforting books, which has worked out beautifully. I don't know if that's actually good advice, but try to find somebody who fits who has the same style as you and has the same ultimate goals in terms of storytelling as you. I think those would be my biggest recommendations.
Definitely 2 good things to sort out before you get going. And also, I think kind of ties into the idea of like, don't force it.
Yes, agreed. Yeah, I think that we've found that to be true as well. And in several of the books we wrote for our Brief Spells and Bridegrooms series, we discovered that around the 30%, 1/3 of the way through the book mark, we would hit some sort of snag where we would both be feeling not so great about the book. Like, I don't know, it's just dragging, it's not feeling right. And we would talk through it and we would admit, like, I don't know, it's just not feeling right. The other would be like, oh my God, same. And so then we'd sort of take a step back and brainstorm and hash it out, and then we'd be able to move forward. And I think that worked really well, not because we accidentally were completely in sync in that way, but also because we didn't both keep trying to push through a story that wasn't feeling right. So
kind of being willing to step back and reassess.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Where can people find you and your books if they are so inclined?
So all of my books are available on all platforms. So you should be able to find them on Amazon, on Barnes & Noble, on Kobo, on Apple. They're available in all formats. So if your preference is ebook or paperback or audiobook, they're available in all of those. If you Google my books or go to your favorite site and look them up, you should be able to find them. They're all on Hoopla as well. And if you really are stuck on where to look, you can go to sarahwallacewriter.com/order, and there's a list of links for each book to take you to a site to order them.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Sarah. Excited to chat with you again soon.
This was delightful. Thank you so much, Sebastian. This was fun.